So, what does a orange mosquito have to do with business growth? And I'm just trying to go live on Instagram, and as it's not working. Okay, today is going to be a no Instagram one. So, what does a orange mosquito have to do with business growth? Now, this mosquito, I'm fairly certain, is nature's way of making a bad situation worse. And I'll give you a bit of background. This was late in the evening and the dog passed out. I can only assume that he thought his shift was over and was contributing precisely nothing to the situation, right? So this horrible orange mosquito was in my bedroom. I could hear it and I was like, I'm never going to be able to sleep. I have to get rid of it, right? But being an only child, I have grown up with doing things myself. There was no partner to call on in this situation. There was no one to delegate the unpleasant jobs to. So I have to just get on with it, and I have to put my big girl pants on and I have to deal with whatever needs dealing with. And that's what I had to do with this blinking orange mosquito. Now, that independence has served me well in most areas of my life. But when I look at it in the context of how business owners operate, and how, if I'm honest, I've operated myself, and I still do even to this day at times, where I see that same instinct playing out in the context where doing it all yourself can quietly cause damage. We all have that habit of cracking on, of wearing every hat, of being the person who just handles shit. In life, it mostly works. In a growing business, it becomes the ceiling, right? Now, the hats, when we first started, we never really agreed to wear, right? Because I can tell you that most business owners didn't sit down at the start of at the start of their business and think, I'd love to be responsible for the accounts, the marketing, the compliance, doing all the client delivery, as well as the IT and HR and anything else that doesn't have an obvious home. You just start because you do what needs to get done. And in the early days, that was the right call, because you don't necessarily have the funds to invest in other sort of teams. There was no one else. And frankly, it was faster at that point to do it yourself than try and explain it to someone else. The problem is that those hats never really get formally taken off as the business grows. You might add a member of the team or two, but the structure underneath doesn't effectively change because nobody's ever sat there and redesigned that structure. So you, as the owner, you're still wearing the hats. Just now, you're also managing people on top of everything else. And what started as a practical necessity becomes a deeply embedded habit that you have, and eventually a structural problem in your business that actively limits how far your business can grow. So why are you still the one wearing all those hats? There's a term for what's happening here. It's what I would call structural dependency. Now, that describes a business that is organised around one person's capacity, usually the business owner, rather than a set defined roles and functions. The business, unfortunately, doesn't really have a team structure. It has a team orbiting around one person who holds the whole thing together. And the reason it happens is because wearing every hat in the early stages is exactly what you're supposed to do. The mistake is simply you don't stop. Now, most owners add people into the mix. They create a team. They hire someone for delivery. But the problem is you're not removing the hats because you're still getting copied into every client email. You bring in an administrator, but you're still approving every invoice. The people are there, but often the structure isn't, because nobody has clearly defined who owns what, right? That result is a business that looks like it has a team, but it's still running like a solo operation. The symptoms are straightforward. Every significant decision roots back to you as the business owner. Staff come to you rather than working within a process. Client delivery still depends on your personal involvement, and growth will flatline because the whole operation is capped at what one person can realistically oversee. This is a design problem, right? The business was never deliberately structured around you. It just defaulted there because structure takes intention, and the early days rarely allow for that, right? The good news is that a design problem has a design solution, okay? So what is this staying in the bottleneck actually costing you? And there are two, right? And they tend to compound each other. The first is internal. When you are permanently the answer to everything, there is a background drain that sets in. Not quite burnout necessarily, but a constant low-level exhaustion that comes from never fully turning off. You get decision fatigue, the feeling of always being reactive, a creeping loss of the clarity and perspective that you need to actually lead a business rather than just run one. Does any of these sound familiar? Love you to pop your comments in the chat. The second cost is commercial. A business built around one person's capacity can only grow as far as that person's capacity stretches, and there is always a ceiling. It's also fragile because if you step back for any reason, whether that's to take a holiday, whether it's because you're unwell, things will either stall or fall apart. And you cannot take on more clients without something else slipping. You cannot focus on the future of the business because the present is constantly pulling you back. Now, one of the places this shows up most clearly is in client delivery, which tends to remain owner dependent long after everything else has potentially been delegated. Now, I'd love to hear if any of this sounds like something that you are dealing with. So how do you change this, right? And the way in which you do it is you map out your team, you hire in the right order, and you build roles that actually work. But how does this work in practical terms, right? Because the goal is to move from a business organized around you to one that's organized around a set of clearly defined roles and functions, and to do it in the right sequence so that each hire genuinely reduces your load rather than adding to it. So first, let's audit those hats. Start by listing every function that currently sits with you, not just tasks, but categories of responsibility. Group them into, say, 5 areas: delivery, administration, sales and marketing, finance and operations. And be genuinely honest about what is yours, because those should be, not because they're ones that are things you just happen to do, right? I want you to be really thinking about what's genuinely yours and the task that you should be doing, and what has simply defaulted to you because nobody else owns it. That distinction matters, because the second group is exactly what you're going to start handing over. Now, number 2, the replacement ladder. So I don't know whether any of you have read the book Buy Back Your Time by Dan Martell, right? It's a brilliant book. It's one of the most practical frameworks available for getting this sequence of hiring the right people right. The principle is straightforward. You replace yourself out of roles in a specific order, starting at the bottom of your time and working upward. So the sequence runs with Administration first, then delivery, then marketing, then sales, then leadership. The reason the order matters is that each rung of the ladder frees up the capacity you need to focus on the next one. Most business owners will hire the wrong person at the wrong time because they hire to add capacity rather than to buy back their own time. And the replacement ladder reverses that logic. You hire to remove yourself from the roles that cost the most time and deliver the least return on your personal involvement. Hopefully that makes sense. So I'd love to hear where you are within the rung of those ladders. Have you got administration support yet? Or have you got that and now you're looking at being able to replace or to kind of at least add to the client delivery side? So if you're a lawyer, adding in lawyers into the mix, or, you know, if you're an accountant, adding in accountant, you know, where are you in that rung? I would love to hear. Make sure you put your comments in the chat. Number 3, you map the core roles your business actually needs. Once you know the order of hiring, the next step is to map out what each role actually covers. But think of it initially as functions rather than necessarily job titles. Administration covers things like inbox management, scheduling, basic finance processing, and the operational tasks that keep the business running day to day. Now, things like the delivery that's covering the execution of your service, the work that goes directly to clients. Your marketing covers things like your lead generation, your content, your presence, all of that side of things. And your sales covers the conversion and the pipeline. Whereas your leadership is talking about strategy, direction, and the relationships that drive that business forward. Now, you may in your business never want to replace the leadership bit because you always want to be there, but you can't be that leader and if you're doing all of the other things. And at different stages of growth, one person may cover more than one function, but each function should have a clear owner. So number 4, define ownership clearly. There is a meaningful difference between someone owning a function and someone assisting with it. Ownership means the person is accountable for the outcomes of that function, not just completing the tasks when asked, but making sure the function runs properly and making the day-to-day decisions that's required without needing to come back to you. Until you have genuine ownership in place, that hat hasn't really left your head. It's just been shared, which means the mental load and the final responsibility still sit with you. And this is probably one of the biggest areas that I see in businesses that is holding the business back. That is where the business is so dependent on the owner, is because they've delegated the task, but they've not delegated the accountability and the responsibility. Then, number 5, write role descriptions that actually work. A useful role description is not just a list of tasks. It's a document that defines what a role, what a role owns, what outcomes it is responsible for, who they report to, and what decisions the person can make without needing to escalate to you as the business owner. And when this is written properly, a role description does several things at once. It clarifies your expectations before you hire, and it gives the person in the role a clear picture of what success actually looks like and becomes the foundation for things like performance conversations down the line, right? Then from the role descriptions, you can then turn to your SOPs, your standard operating procedures. A well-written description is also the starting point for creating your standard operating procedures. Because once you know what a role owns, you can begin to document how the work within that role gets done, the steps, the standards, the decisions, and the escalation points. This is how a business starts to create and operate in independently of one specific individual, especially you, the business owners. Now, SOPs don't necessarily need to be lengthy or complex. They simply need to answer the question: if the person in this role was not available tomorrow, could someone else pick this up and know what to do? If the answer is no, the process is living in someone's head rather than in the business, and that is a structural vulnerability, right? The day that you finally put those hats down is crucial, right? Because now, if you go back to the mosquito that I talk about, that when I think about it in terms of how I've approached building support around me and my business and in my life, the instinct for me is just to handle it, to crack on, to not need anyone else. It's something that's deeply embedded in me. And as a Taurus, I'm known for it. You know, I'm just literally a bull in a china shop. And in some ways, I wouldn't be without that, because that drive and that determination and that kind of need to keep pushing through has, in all honesty, it's made a huge difference in my life. And I honestly wouldn't be without it. But I've also learned that independence and self-sufficiency can be taken too far and can actually become a way of staying small in your business. And what shifted when I'm not perfect at this. The one thing you will learn about me is I come from a complete place of authenticity. I'm not perfect. I'm still making mistakes. I'm still building my own business as well as helping you guys. And I've started to build a proper structure around the work. Now, my independence hasn't disappeared, because at the moment I have a very limited team. Most of it is just down to me. But that will change. And I'm trying to build a business that ultimately that I can then start actually delegating and passing that accountability and responsibility to things, right? Now, the energy that has been going into wearing every hat started going into the things that actually needed me. And this is where I have made massive changes: the thinking, the direction, the relationships, the decisions that genuinely has required my judgment. That's the point of building a team structure, not to hand things off and step back, but to actually create the space so you can step forward in the right areas, you can lead. You know, this is where I talk about the shift from being owner-operator to leader. Now, when most people start a business, they have a picture in their mind of what it will look like: the freedom, the impact, the ability to do work they care about on their own terms. What they rarely picture is spending the majority of their time answering to everyone else's questions, managing things that shouldn't need managing, feeling as though the business owns them rather than the other way around. Whereas a proper team structure is what brings the original picture back into reach. Not because it removes all the difficulty. Running a business is never going to be without demands. It's a roller coaster. We know that. We know it's just the nature of the beast. But it does mean that demands are the right ones, the ones that actually do need you as a business owner, the ones that actually going to build the business, the ones that you need to spend your time on. Now, structure is what makes that growth stick. It's easy to think of a team structure as something you'll sort out later, once there's more money, more time, more breathing room. And I promise you, the amount of times I hear where clients, I'll have conversations with potential prospects and they're not quite ready to take that leap yet. And I think it's like, oh, you know, I'll do something once it calms down. It never calms down. Because even once you've dealt with one fire, there's always going to be another fire. But you've got to make a decision. At what point are you going to take that leap and make a change? Because, you know, structure is not a reward for growth. It's what actually makes that growth possible in the first place. So put that structure in. If you're early stages of business, put your structure in as early as you can. Even if it's a case of, as you're still doing things, you're documenting those things, those processes. So when you bring somebody on, half of the job is done. Because without it, every step forward creates more complexity, more noise, and more dependency on you as the business owner, who is already carrying way too much, right? And the businesses that scale well are not the ones where the owner works the hardest, right? They may be fairly profitable, potentially, but they're not going to scale. So it depends on what you want to do with your business. If you want to grow and scale, you need structure, right? They are the ones that are scale the best, are the ones where the owner has been deliberate about what they build around them. They audit the hats, they apply the replacement ladder, they define the roles, they write the descriptions, and they build the processes, right? So if you are ready to map out your team structure, if you are ready to stop being the bottleneck, right? If you are ready to have this structure that actually is the right one for you to scale, the right roles in the right order with the clarity to make it work, I would love to have a conversation with you. So make sure that if you just simply comment the word bottleneck, right? And we can book in a free peak business performance strategy session, and we can work through this together. Now, I really hope that you have found what I've shared with you today. These are genuinely things I see on a regular basis where business owners, they are the bottleneck. And the big reason for that is not because they have not got the right team structure in place. So like I said, if you are interested in having a conversation with me, simply comment the word bottleneck and let's talk. Thanks for listening, and I will see